You've been holding something for weeks, not a crisis, just a low, constant weight. You kept moving. But the chest knew before the mind was ready to admit it. Tonight, that ends. For weeks, Mars and Saturn pressed effort against a wall in Aries. Saturn and Neptune dissolved the stories you used to stay functional. The full moon in Scorpio arrives exact tonight, opposite the Taurus sun. It doesn't explain the feeling, it names it. Named things cannot be carried the same way. That weight you've been calling fine, it already has a different name. It wasn't a breakdown, nothing dramatic happened. You went to work, you answered messages, someone asked how you were doing, and you said, fine, maybe even meant it for a second. But at some point during the day, maybe in the elevator, maybe between two tasks, maybe just lying in bed at the end of it, there was this thing in the chest. Not pain, not anxiety exactly. More like pressure. Like something sitting there that didn't belong to the moment you were in. Like something in the room that wasn't in the room. Present. Just not named. You breathe and the breath is a little shorter than usual. You get into bed and the chest doesn't quite settle the way it normally does. Nothing's wrong, nothing you can point to. That's actually the whole problem. You can't point to it. So you called it tired. Said you needed a quieter week, more sleep, a break from whatever. But the body wasn't tired the way sleep fixes. The body was holding something that hadn't been said out loud yet. And those two things, tiredness and carrying, feel almost identical from the inside. Both of them flatten you by the end of the day. Both of them make small things cost more than they should. But one of them goes away when you rest. The other one is still there in the morning. You already know which one this has been. Some part of you has been protecting yourself from knowing it too clearly. Because once you know something clearly, you have to decide what to do with it. So it was easier to keep it soft, keep it vague, keep it in the category of, I'm just a bit off lately. You kept functioning because there was nothing specific to blame. No event, no conversation, no clear moment when it started. Just this low-grade thing that stayed. So you stayed in motion above it, which is what most people do. Not avoidance exactly, just what operational looks like from the outside. But the body doesn't care what operational looks like. It doesn't take notes on your performance. It just records what's true. And for the past few weeks, it's been recording something, steadily, quietly, while you kept your face neutral and your calendar full. That gap between what the body already registered and what the mind hasn't been willing to say out loud. That's what tonight is about. Not a decision, not a conversation. Just a name the body knew first. But the body doesn't explain. It just holds. And it's been holding this long enough. Tonight the sky has something to say about what's actually in there. So let's talk about the weather. Not the emotional weather, the actual configuration that's been sitting over the past few weeks. Because what you felt in your chest wasn't random. It had a source, and when you understand the source, something in you stops blaming yourself for being tired. Since mid-April, there were two planets pressed hard against each other in Aries. Mars, action, drive, the part of you that moves, and Saturn, resistance, limits, the part that says not yet. When these two sit together, you don't get a wall you can see and walk around. You get effort that goes somewhere but doesn't arrive. You push on something and it holds. You do the right things and nothing shifts. Not failure, not catastrophe, just friction. Constant, invisible friction. Think about the last few weeks. Was there a project, a conversation, a situation where you kept showing up and it kept not moving? Not collapsed, not over, just stuck. Like everything was wrapped in something. The motion was real. But the result felt like walking in sand. You're moving. It's costing you, and the ground keeps giving back less than it should. And at some point, you stop expecting it to change. You just adjust and walk slower. That's not a personal malfunction. That's just what those two planets together feel like in practice. And underneath that, something quieter, but maybe harder to shake. Saturn and Neptune have been sitting on the same degree in Aries since earlier this year. Neptune dissolves, Saturn builds. When they're on top of each other, what gets dissolved are the small structures you use to keep yourself functional. Not the big convictions, the daily ones, the quiet convincing. This will shift soon. They mean well. I'm just in a rough patch. If I push a little harder, it'll click. Those weren't lies exactly. They were load-bearing. And slowly, not suddenly, not through any one moment, some of them started feeling hollow. The story stopped fitting the thing it was supposed to explain. And on top of all of this, everything in Aries, Sun, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Neptune, all stacked in the same sign for the whole month. When that many planets sit in one place, there's no neutral topic, no corner you can retreat into that isn't touched by the same theme. Every conversation about work felt like a conversation about who you are. Every small frustration carried identity weight. Every decision, even a tiny one, landed like it mattered. That's exhausting. Not because something terrible was happening, but because you couldn't get a break from the question of you. You weren't weak. You were in weather. There's a difference. And here's what most people don't register. You can be fine, functionally, technically fine, and still be completely worn down by a few weeks of that. It's not a crisis. It's just what sustained low-grade pressure without release looks like at the end of a month. This pressure hasn't gone. It's still in the air right now. But tonight something arrives that doesn't just press, it illuminates. Not a new situation, just new clarity about the one you've already been living in. So what actually happens tonight? Not symbolically, mechanically. What is a full moon doing, specifically when it sits in Scorpio and faces off against the sun in Taurus? Taurus is the sign of what you hold, what you protect, what you've decided has value and are keeping close, your sense of stability, your version of how things are supposed to go. Taurus doesn't let go easily. That's not weakness, that's the entire function. You hold things because they're supposed to matter. Scorpio is what's true underneath what you're holding. It doesn't care about the version of events that's easier to live with. It doesn't negotiate with comfort. It just knows what's actually there, the cost you haven't fully looked at, the dynamic you've been keeping slightly out of focus. Because looking at it directly would require a response you're not sure you're ready to give. A full moon on this axis puts those two directly across from each other. What you've been holding and what's actually true about it, not a fight, just a confrontation between two kinds of knowing, both real, both yours. And here's how this actually works. The full moon doesn't deliver new information from outside. It doesn't arrive with a revelation attached. It just lights up what was already there. Think of it like a room you've been moving around in with the curtains drawn, not because you were hiding something, just because that was the default. Tonight the light comes through. You're not seeing something new. You're seeing the same thing you've lived with, finally, in full light. The shape you already knew was there. Maybe something happened yesterday that felt slightly off, a conversation that got sharper than you planned, something that came out of your mouth and surprised you. A frustration that pushed through the surface when you weren't watching. If that happened, it wasn't a mistake. It was the last bit of friction before something in you stops resisting what it already knows. One final pressure point, and now you're on the other side of it. So tonight, the moon in Scorpio is doing what it always does, which is refuse to let the surface pass as the full story. And the sun in Taurus is doing what it always does, holding the form, protecting what it values. The tension between those two isn't destructive, it's diagnostic. It shows you exactly where the gap lives between what you've been maintaining and what you actually know about it underneath. That gap is where the name is. It might not feel dramatic, might be very quiet. A moment in the kitchen, lying in bed. Some thought that finishes itself differently than it used to. That used to end with, but I'm probably just overthinking this, and now just ends. No qualifier, no cushion. Just the thing itself, sitting there in the open. That's what tonight is. Not a portal, not a turning point in the movie sense, just light landing where you'd been not quite looking. And what happens when something gets that kind of light? That's what we need to talk about next. Here's the part that most people miss. Because when we talk about a full moon, there's usually an assumption built in, that the point is the revelation, the seeing. Like, once you see something clearly, you've done the hard part, and now there's a decision to make, a plan to execute, a life to reorganize. But that's not actually how it works. The naming itself is the event. not the preparation for something, the thing. Let me explain what I mean. When something doesn't have a name, when it's just a feeling, just a weight, just a vague sense that something isn't right, it spreads. It fills whatever space it's in because it has no edges. Your nervous system doesn't know where it starts and stops, so it treats the whole territory as potentially relevant. You spend energy moving around it, protecting yourself from accidentally looking at it directly, holding the shape of normal while this shapeless thing lives in the background. That costs a lot, more than people realize, not because the thing itself is so terrible, but because unnamed things have to be managed constantly. You can't put something down if you can't find its edges. Now give it a name. Not a public declaration, not a conversation, not a decision, just the words, in your own head, in the dark, on a Tuesday night. This relationship is wearing me down. This version of me I've been performing is not actually me. I've been working towards something I stopped believing in. Just that. Just the sentence. Something changes immediately. Not around you, inside you. The thing now has a size, a location. It stops being everywhere and becomes somewhere. And something in your body, your shoulders, your chest, your jaw, starts to unclench around it. Not because the situation is resolved, because you're no longer spending energy pretending there's nothing to resolve. That's the mechanism. Naming is not a metaphor for change. It is a structural change. It moves you from carrying something undefined to holding something real. And real things, even difficult ones, can actually be worked with. Tomorrow, there's an alignment that confirms exactly this. Mercury, how we speak, how we think, how we put language to experience, meets Chiron, which sits at the oldest unhealed point, the place that's been tender for a long time. When those two meet, it's not that the wound gets worse. It's that it finally gets words. The thing you've been feeling around in the dark gets a shape you can actually say out loud. Today, you see it. Tomorrow, you might be able to speak it. That sequence matters. It's not simultaneous. First, the light, then the language. The full moon is the first step, visibility. What follows is the step where visibility becomes something you can actually hold in your hands. So tonight, if something surfaces that you'd normally redirect, minimize, or file under. I'll think about that later. Don't. Not because you have to do anything with it, just let it have its name. Let the sentence finish. This is costing me more than it's giving. That thought, completed, without the usual cushion at the end, that's already an act. That's already the thing moving. So where does it actually land? Not in general, in your life. In the specific texture of your days. Because tonight's full moon doesn't arrive in the abstract, it shows up somewhere. And usually, it's one of three places. The first is the body. If you've been running on slightly less than you needed, waking up already behind, getting through the day but not really landing in it, feeling like the tiredness goes deeper than sleep can touch, that's not a medical mystery. That's what it feels like to hold something unacknowledged for weeks. The body's been doing the administrative work of keeping everything stable while the mind held its position of nothing to see here. When the named thing finally gets its name, even just internally, even just tonight, the body is usually the first to respond. Not with a dramatic shift, more like a long exhale you didn't plan. Like something behind your sternum that loosens by about 3 degrees. It won't feel like a cure, but it'll feel like the first honest breath in a while. Tonight, before you fall asleep, just try not tightening. You don't have to do anything with it. Just notice if the chest is bracing against something, and let it not. The second zone is relationships. There's something that hasn't been said. Maybe between you and a specific person. Maybe it's not a fight. Maybe it's just a zone you've both been politely not entering. A topic that gets redirected. A pattern that you've both noticed, but neither has named out loud, because naming it changes the rules, and you both know that. You don't have to have the conversation tonight, but after tonight, you won't be able to fully pretend the zone isn't there. One of you already sees it now. And seeing it changes how you move around it, even when you're staying quiet. That's not destabilization, that's just honesty arriving in the room before the words do. The third zone is the role. There's a version of yourself you've been performing, not because you chose it deliberately, but because it accumulated, because people expected it, because it was easier than renegotiating. And it's been costing you at a rate that doesn't make sense anymore given what it returns. Maybe it's a role at work. Maybe it's being the person who's always fine, always available, always the one who holds things together. Maybe it's a story about what you're supposed to want by now. Tonight, one question, not a plan, just a question. What am I carrying that I never actually agreed to carry? You don't have to answer it fully. You don't have to answer it at all right now. But letting it actually sit there without immediately filing it under later, that's already the move. One of these three landed heavier than the others when I said it. You already know which one. That's your zone. That's where the name lives. And now, what do you actually do with something you can no longer pretend you don't see? So what do you actually do with it? Not the big picture, not the plan. Just, what do you do with something you've named? Something that now has edges and weight and a real address in your life. Something you can no longer call fine. First, you don't have to do anything dramatic. That's worth saying clearly. The named thing doesn't require immediate action. You don't have to quit anything, end anything, or announce anything to anyone. The shift that happened tonight isn't a starting gun. It's more like the moment you finally set your bags down and look at what you've been carrying. What changes first is much simpler. The energy you were spending on maintenance, on keeping the story coherent, on managing the distance between what you felt and what you said, that energy starts to come back. Slowly, but it starts. Because you're no longer running two things in parallel. You're not holding the named thing and simultaneously holding the performance that there's nothing to name. That's the first practical return. Not a solution, just resources that were locked up coming loose. By tomorrow, something in the sky shifts into a different register. The first stabilizing pressure arrives, not a breakthrough, just a grounding. The kind that says, okay, real things can be worked with. You don't have to have the answer yet, but you can take one actual step from where you actually are. One step, not a list, not a restructure, one. Maybe you stop automatically filling silence in a conversation where the silence is trying to tell you something. Maybe you say, I can't do that once, where before you would have said, let me see what I can do. Maybe you just rest, actually rest, without earning it first or justifying it afterward. Maybe you write down the sentence that finished itself tonight, not to do anything with it, just so it exists somewhere outside your chest. One thing, tomorrow. Done from the position of someone who already sees, not someone still pretending they don't. Because here's the honest version of what comes next. It's not lighter in the way you were hoping. There's no sudden ease. The situation that was heavy is still the situation. The relationship, the role, the thing that was costing more than it gave, it's still there. But it's there differently. You're holding it with your eyes open now. And that changes everything about how much of you it can take. Unnamed things are bottomless. They'll take whatever you give them and still feel unresolved. Named things have a floor. They can be set down, not immediately, not all at once, but they can be worked with, moved, or let go in a way that formless things never can. Something settled, not resolved, but no longer formless. The body stops defending against what it already accepts. The difference isn't in what you now know. It's in what you can no longer pretend you don't. A relationship, a role, a story about yourself that was costing more than it gave. It no longer has the same grip. Not because you decided, because you named it. What comes next isn't lighter in the way you expected. It's just real. And real things, even heavy ones, can be put down. If something in this landed, subscribe. The next video follows what the named thing does when the pressure lifts.